On today's World Insight, modern historic China, an academic focus for a rising number of scholars in the mainland and HKSAR. Why the need to take a closer study of China? Li Cheng counts the ways as he heads the University of Hong Kong's Center on Contemporary China and the World.
World Insight with Li Tianwei. At a time of great transition, the study of China has become ever more crucial. To catch up with the latest changes of China, more international scholars with an academic focus on China are moving to the mainland and Hong Kong to conduct their research while taking advantage of the latest policies encouraging international talents to establish their own projects in China. Li Cheng and his colleagues are among them. Li served earlier as director and senior fellow at the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. Recently, he established the CCCW, or Center on Contemporary China and the World, at the University of Hong Kong. I talked to him and his colleagues about these latest trends. All of you are now teaching and doing your research about China from the University of Hong Kong. Tell me about why you made that choice. Why is it important for you given the shifting backdrop of the world and certainly of the studying China academic realities? Let's go to Professor Li first.
I think that as a scholar in the think tank Washington, my Chinese background, ethnic Chinese background, used to be an asset 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but now become a liability and in the current political atmosphere. So that's the part of the reason. Now, I myself did not experience some kind of a harassment or political pressure, just feel that I could not do too much. Hong Kong gave me the opportunity. I think Hong Kong can take advantage in this particular historical moment when U.S. There's a strong kind of pressure, and also the China studies actually really significantly hurt by decoupling, academic decoupling, and many other things. Hong Kong, certainly, you can see from three of us and many, many others end up in Hong Kong that speak clearly about the great effort by Hong Kong University to recruit global scholars.
In common with the other two guests, we both work on bridging China. We want to try to explain China to the rest of the world in relatively balanced and nuanced ways. And Hong Kong is a great place to do that, where we're perceived as, as a kind of somewhere in the middle.
Dr. Wang, you are of arguably a different generation compared to the other two gentlemen who just spoke. So tell me about your choices.
Answer your question, I think of three main reasons, really. The first being the prominence and the rise of Asia as a new locus and engine of growth in the world, as a source of a rich tapestry of ideas, of intellectual traditions, ranging from ancient Indian philosophy through to Buddhist theology and contemporary Chinese political philosophy, and all the way through to Central Asian, the political practices of maneuvering between great powers. These are all facets of political sciences and philosophical nuances I find intriguing and captivating, and above all, they epitomize really the rise of the global south, the rise of a multipolar world that may not be here with us today and yet would eventually hopefully be the case. And I feel that Hong Kong is probably the best spot and place to conveniently and also accessibly enable me to grapple and wrestle with all of these intellectual traditions and thoughts rolled into one. Secondly, on China, identify firmly, with this wonderful, fascinating, mesmerizing country. And to me, this country is by no means perfect. It has areas for improvement. It has flaws. It has, struggles and, frankly, barriers, right, as it advances its economy and grows and rises.
After 3 years of pandemic, there certainly is a gap of information and academic exchanges between China and the rest of the world. Now, how do you see the changes of angles, the perceptions of studying China in the rest of the world? And while working on the subjects that you are right now, how do you see you're trying to communicate better with your colleagues from different parts of the world?
Well, we can access China. This is the advantage of Hong Kong, that I attended academic conferences, did field work, interview people, met with Chinese leaders. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, amount of information, and my colleagues in the U.S. simply could not compare with this kind of access. But most importantly, because our collaboration with Chinese scholars, we build up kind of trust. We open to each other. We discuss different issues from different perspectives. We form, some kind of a consortium, joint effort. This put us, in a very, very good advantage to the position to understand China. And I think this is the things that I certainly benefit. I think my colleagues also do that.
And also you established a CCCW, big congratulations. How do you see this platform might be providing more talents?
Well, certainly we emphasize governance, both domestic governance in China and the global governance, including some of the major countries such as the United States. I think that, I spent 38 years in the United States. In case of Brian Wang, also studied UK and as a Rhodes Scholar. And for Daniel Bill, certainly he knows America so well, and also Canada, where he come from. So this kind of knowledge help us with Western, some theoretical or methodological approach, but also we become increasingly critical about the limits or out of touch or narrowness of our American approach. I think we are in a good position to really establish some kind of middle-level series to test in the Chinese context. When I started study about technocracy 30 years ago, people refused to accept. When I started middle class 20 years ago, people also, my colleagues in the United States refused. I cannot get it published, but now all become trend. China is dominated by technocrats. China's middle class from not existed 30 years ago to now the largest middle class country. Now, what I want to do at the moment to very much follow the leadership of Daniel Bill to better understand the Chinese political system and compare that system with other political systems. I think that too often we just consider the Chinese system is stagnant and or out of touch and with all these bad words, but cannot explain what's going on and the dynamics and the paradoxes and the contradiction, but also in light of the recent development in the United States, particularly after January 6th, the terrible tragedy. So I think we should also look at the American political system in new light. So I think we are fortunately in a position to make such comparison.
Your subjects certainly also, Dr. Wang, is political studies in its connection with philosophies. You study authoritarian regimes. And many of these subjects are not necessarily popular or widespread subjects in Chinese university based on the mainland. So how do you see the changing landscape that we are talking about here, as Professor Li earlier mentioned? And what about the niche that you are trying to catch?
Absolutely. For decades, Anglo-American political philosophy had been largely fascinated by, at least in a sort of primary orthodox debate, really, by liberal, well-formed democratic regimes and well-ordered societies, so to speak, as John Rawls would put it. And yet what I've always found myself thinking about is, what about all the regimes and all the governments and countries around the world, whether they be good or bad, legitimate or illegitimate, that do not necessarily conform to that very narrowly defined definition or archetype of political governments. And it could be that these other regimes are indeed terrible because they do not service the end outcomes, not deliver upon the performance, legitimacy, and guaranteed a stable livelihood and well-being for the people. And it could also be be the case that despite not possessing the features that are often seen as a prerequisite for analysis in Western philosophy, these regimes can in fact do things in their own way in accordance with alternatives to the Western liberal democratic system. This is not to say that we should reject electoral democracy or to see the American and the British systems as therefore necessarily intrinsically flawed. But it is to say that perhaps it's high time for a more expansive conception of what legitimacy is, and an attempt to separate legitimacy from democracy, and to also identify different categories of legitimacy and explore ways by which non-democratic mechanisms of accountability, as well as democratic institutions, are both necessary and even in some cases sufficient in unlocking.
Okay. The other question people might ask you, the three of you, and even beyond, is what about credibility? They are saying you are based in Hong Kong, it is part of China. And even though there's one country, two systems, you have also been seeing the changes in Hong Kong. So tell me more about how do you respond to others when they're saying, oh, you're just staying in China for too long? What about your credibility? What about your academic independence? Questions like that. How would you respond? What are you thinking when they're asking questions like these? Professor Bell.
Yeah, well, I've faced so many accusations of being a psychologist and brainwashed and so on. I mean, I think the only way to respond is to frankly, to do research that is balanced and informative, and hopefully the message will get through, even though perhaps I'm not having that much success.
Professor Li.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing, that there's some taboos, and document 9 talk about the 7 no's and etc. So of course, for scholars, professors like ourselves, of course, that we value academic freedom, freedom of expression. But it's very interesting. Just I had a conversation just a couple of days ago. People talk about in California, there's 7 no's. There's the University of Berkeley. There are a lot of things you cannot say, and etc. So I think we should put it into perspective. I think that Professor Daniel Bell was absolutely right, that this is an experience that I also live in Washington. There's so much superficial understanding of China, and fail to understand the paradoxical nature of China's development, because with this kind of mindset, you could not understand the subtlety, the complexity, and the ever-changing nature of the country. I think this is as my 2 colleagues said so well, it's a bridging role. I think we're determined to play that important role, and the establishment of the Center on Contemporary China and the World, known as a CCCW, aim to try to find a kind of intellectual home for many scholars, whether North and South, East and West, to really have the communication. And also we want to promote the so-called second track dialogue when government-to-government relation is in jeopardy, when business-to-business relation is not in good shape. I think a people-to-people relation, the university-based think tank is part of that, the new trend. I think we want to play that important role. Ultimately, it's really a matter of peace and war, and understanding is extremely important at this perplexing time in world affairs.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines. Professor Bell, we have seen over the past 3 years, there is such a lack of academic exchanges, not only between China and the United States, but also in different parts of the world. What is the best way to make it up to a better level at this moment with the with biggest deficiency? I really wonder about that. And what do you see as the biggest obstacles at this moment?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's still over 300,000 Chinese students in the US, so arguably that's not the problem. The problem is that there's so few Americans in China, in mainland China. I think it was 350 or something. So what China can do is just make it easier through issuing visas in an easier way, and also having mechanisms that allow people to buy things in a more straightforward way. I mean, if you don't have Weixin now in China, it's pretty hard to go to a store to buy food, right? But I think Hong Kong's here it's still it's not just a bridging place, but it makes it easier. First of all, there's a language, so it's much easier to attract students from English-speaking countries. And also, perhaps we have more resources to facilitate exchange. So I think Hong Kong is particularly valuable for this purpose as well.
Brian, you mentioned several times about the global south. Now, there has been such a rise of intellectual curiosity about this terminology and what it means for the future. But there's a lack of really sophisticated yet academic approach to that. How do you see where China is, what provided the groundwork for studying the global south?
First and foremost, imperative that we recognize that the global south is not a homogeneous entity. It is not a monolith. It is incredibly diverse. Just take China and India, the two most populous nations in the world, for example, and there are lots of areas and principles over which they disagree. And yet there are also certain commonalities that undergird both countries' foreign policies. The yearning and desire for the recognition that this is no longer a world that should be dominated by a singular pole, e.g. America or any alternative power. The idea that fundamentally we can construct systems of governance and also civilizational ideals that are different from Eurocentric or Anglo-American centric notions of what is just and what is right, even though there are, of course, similarities in the common or the pursuit of the common good, pursuit of a good life, so on and so forth. So I think recognizing and harnessing the diversity there is imperative. And secondly, I do believe that China would benefit from acknowledging and more explicitly, instantiating the agency of small and medium states within the global south. And that is to say, whilst in the status quo, Beijing does pay rhetorical heed and acknowledge on paper and also in documents that many small and medium states have the right to own determination and their own fate, it would be even better if in our political interactions, our economic interactions, there's a genuine attempt to incorporate the voices of the people, the voices of the masses, the businessmen, the intellectuals, the so to speak, of the societies of countries in the global south, to incorporate them into the fold of developmental aid, of economic interactions, and also of course, the multilateral frameworks that China is spearheading today.
We have seen over the past few decades ever more increasing curiosity, interests, and also capabilities that the Chinese academic circle has acquired from studying their colleagues, particularly in the West. Of course, now with the shifting of topics of study here in China, we also see some soul-searching about what might be some of the best methods for the Chinese academics. Now, since you know both worlds together with the other two speakers, how do you see this search for the updated methodologies, way of thinking, and the so-called between the East and the West?
Well, one of the phenomena in China the past few decades is the revival of cultural traditions, including Confucianism. And that's taking academic form where the universities, now previously I was at Shandong University, which, as you know, is the heart of Confucian. Shandong province is the heart of Confucian culture. And we had many seminars on, for example, Xunzi, as well as comparisons between, for example, Confucianism and ancient Indian political thought. Those sorts of questions are not typically asked in the West, but they're hugely, and they're very diverse debates. And I think it's encouraging, so long as China remains open to learning from best practices, best academic practices and methodologies abroad. I think it's a very encouraging trend. I mean, frankly, people think of the 1980s in China as a very open time, but it wasn't that much. I mean, most academics thought that we should almost, adopt, I'm not going to say blindly adopt, but Western methodologies and ideals. But now there's much more diversity of views within China.
Professor Li, agree? What's your observation?
Certainly, that earlier I only just mentioned the problem in the Western world. But also, of course, on the one hand, the Chinese academic really had a tremendous progress over the past 3 decades through reform and openness. But at the same time, I think some of the research method probably should be, in my view, should be more quantitative and more kind of methodological, sophisticated, rather than just following certain line and talk about the things without the backing. I think these things should be improved. But I don't want to be too critical. I think that you do see some world-class scholars emerge. Otherwise, Daniel, Bill, and I will not edit their work to introduce them to the outside world. But unfortunately, the still English dominated language, so it's unfair. But our effort is still, it's just limited. But I think that as time passes on, the outside world will gradually understand the pluralistic nature, as Brian Wang always emphasized. Not only the Western world, but China also become increasingly pluralistic in terms of scholarly community. I think that the problem is the outside world, particularly United States, to fail understand. This is the country with different layers, different groups, different views. And so to a certain extent that it's so similar to the academic field that we're familiar with. So actually for me, I took advantage about the things Western scholars try to ignore, overlook, but China certainly it's still a taboo. So of course, I hope that eventually, Chinese scholars can also study these kind of issues, and then I think the whole quality of research in China will also gradually improve. But we're fortunate in Hong Kong at this moment. I think that probably will not be too long that moment to take advantage of both situation in China and also situation in the Western world.
Professor Li, I saw you running a center study China with the Brookings Institution based in Washington for years before moving on to your current job running CCCW in Hong Kong University. Professor Bell, I saw you running a Chinese academic department with a Chinese university in Shandong before moving to Hong Kong, and you also wrote a book about that personal experience. I always wondered, what is that like, that cultural clash, cultural differences and the similarities in both of you to fulfill your earlier job and your current roles as well?
Being a mid-level kind of public official, it requires extremely hard work ethic. We're always on call. We have 4-hour meetings. And I did my best to participate, but I realized that I just didn't have the same energy that my fellow, I'll call them fellow leaders had. So I served as dean for 5 years, but I realized that ultimately, I mean, Professor Li is a brilliant organizer and administrator and leader, but I'm perhaps most at home in my humble office reading books and writing.
Professor Li, Professor Bell is kicking the ball to your court.
He has a wonderful style of leadership that I really try to mimic. No, I'm really fortunate to benefit from both countries and also the people who taught me so many things. I actually started a study of politics largely since I arrived California, Berkeley, 38 years ago. And I work at the Brookings with a wonderful team. These people, the later Jeff Bader, later David Dollar, and also many other people like Ken Libersol and Susan Thornton. I mean, these are all wonderful friends, mentor, and colleagues. The thing is that that experience it's very, very important to me. And also, I think that I never miss the point that the American goodwill to China, represented by these wonderful scholars and by the ordinary people that I, met on the daily life in the United States. The same things, I think that I benefit from my experience in China and grew up in China. That's Chinese culture, Shanghai culture is always part of me. So I think for those of us have this kind of privilege to understand, both culture and the benefit from both culture, I think we have the obligation to serve as a bridge. So again, I think still U.S.-China relation deterioration has numerous reasons, but one of them, I would say, is very important one, is a misunderstanding, and or it's a kind of fear, ungrounded fear, drive countries to be suspicious about each other, to how to demystify this fear and challenge this kind of animosities and etc. is our job. And at this particular moment, I think that we have a very important position. Not to mention which is right, which is wrong, to point out a finger to each other, but rather we want to, through our work, to emphasize common ground and the common interests. This interest could be academic interest, could be economic interest, could be even security interest. Ultimately, I think let this common interest to prevail rather than kind of demonization, suspicion, misunderstanding, misperception, and the fear dominate our thinking of each other.
Dr. Wang, any final thoughts?
I think Hong Kong is a special place. It will forever and hopefully forever remain the most open, the most liberal and cosmopolitan part of China, a special administrative region governed by one country, two systems. And there's a reason why the two systems exist. And it is not separate, but in order to ensure that our distinctiveness can complement and also facilitate China's growth, opening up, and also engagement with the world at large going forward. And that, to me, is what Hong Kong really ought to be, which is why we must maintain our uniqueness. And that is something I'd like to affirm here once again. Thank you.
Okay. All of you are fascinating to me, really, from very different ways, and I have a lot to learn. Thank you so much for your trust and also for your support. I'm looking forward to talking to you in the near future. Cheng Li, Daniel Bell, Brian Wang, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my conversation with Li Cheng and his colleagues from CCCW with the University of Hong Kong. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, you can always search World Insight on our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.